Serious debate about the stability of the property market has been sparked by Standard & Poor's ratings downgrade of small lenders. S&P stated concerns about the Melbourne and Sydney markets as key to the move, joining Citibank, who has warned of big falls to come. There are already signs the slowdown has begun, with prices wavering for apartments in Melbourne and Brisbane. The question for owners and banks is how big any price fall will be. Here's Emily Stewart.
Ming Lee is a real estate agent in Melbourne's eastern suburbs. He specialises in selling Australian property to Chinese investors.
The Melbourne apartment market is cooling down. It's kind of the oversupply market, and the Chinese background investors are losing their interest in buying apartment in Melbourne. In terms of capital gain return is so low.
Chinese investors have helped drive the inner city apartment market to new heights. Around 5,000 new apartments will be completed and up for sale this year.
If you look at apartment approvals, which is I guess a bit of a reflection on apartment off the plan demand, they probably peaked about 18 months ago and they've started to slow.
Ming Lee believes around 80% of Chinese buyers won't be able to settle because of trouble getting finance.
The Chinese government's new policies, which only allow Chinese individuals to transfer the money, about $50,000 to overseas per head per year. If more than that amount, they need to submit the applications to authorities, and it becomes harder and harder.
And they can't borrow money locally either, with Australian banks tightening their lending criteria for offshore investors. So many of his clients have either lost their deposits or sold their apartments at a loss. 7 to 8%, and in some of the extreme cases, they lost a 10% deposit. Around average, they lost about 50,000 to 80,000.
Well, we did an analysis a little while ago looking at people who had purchased an apartment off the plan since 2011 and had since resold, and we found that 60% of buyers who had purchased off the plan and resold recorded either no price growth or a loss.
Recently, Citi warned the downturn in apartments will next year filter through to a 7% price correction in the broader housing market and the economy. And this week, ratings agency S&P has downgraded all 23 second-tier financial institutions, saying the risk of a sharp correction in property prices has increased. And that downgrade has prompted a furious reaction from the small banks, led by the Bank of Queensland.
Our market share, particularly in key markets that S&P are worried about, Melbourne and Sydney, we actually have very, very small exposure into those key markets. So it doesn't make any sense at all.
But economist Philip Seuss says S&P is right to be cautious.
There certainly is a housing bubble in Australia. Since 1996, we've seen housing prices inflate above all known fundamentals, such as GDP, inflation, income, rents, and population growth.
With Australians holding more debt than ever before.
In aggregate, Australia has accumulated the world's second highest household debt to GDP ratio, the size of the economy, at 123% and rising. And all countries that have a ratio above 100 have experienced or are currently experiencing a housing bubble.
Property analyst Angie Zigomanis says prices have peaked, but says predictions of a sharp fall are wrong.
In terms of prices, we think they can be justified at the moment by population growth, by interest rates, by demand, by employment growth, etc. In some ways, prices are priced to perfection, and as long as conditions stay where they are roughly, they can still support prices where they are. And over the next 2 or 3 years, we don't necessarily see any big shock coming through that'll push prices down.
Ming Lee certainly hopes so. His new target is Chinese parents looking to migrate to give their children a better education.
They would like to pay about, for example, the 10% more for the market price for those properties in Camberwell, in Kew, in Hawthorne, in Glen Areas.
815.
But if S&P's warning is correct, attracting premium prices is about to get a lot harder.